Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Agatha All Along, Season 1, Episode 3. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So we're immediately picking up with our crew on the Witch's Road where the last episode left off. And obviously, Sharon is not enjoying this because she's like, I didn't decide to come along. I was kind of dragged along. We were being chased by something. It's like, well, we weren't. Agatha was, but we're all kind of screwed because whatever came after Agatha is coming after us, which she's not specifically telling him. It's like, well, it was kind of the Salem 7. I mean, I don't know if that would mean anything to them. I would assume it would, but who knows? But there's a lot, obviously, Agatha hasn't bothered explaining. Because I'm so curious about her first time down the road, because I wonder, well, she has an idea of the trials and stuff like that, but I guess maybe depending on who's taking it, it manifests itself differently, because when they ultimately do the first trial this episode, it didn't mean anything to Agatha. So I guess, like, because she went in here with a different group, it ended up meaning, like, the trials are different. I'm sure they're different every single time, because there's no cheat sheet for the trials, I'd assume, maybe. But I guess maybe it's just, like, generally speaking, what they are supposed to represent maybe stays the same, or I don't know. Some other interesting thing, too, is the teen ends up, like, the sigil, as they call it, kind of the spell, the glamour that he's under. The others see it, and they're like, oh, wait, that's a sigil you're under. He's like, wait, what? Obviously, the teen is completely unaware of what's going on. And I love Agatha's like, yeah, well, he's a nut. That's a mystery we'll crack later. But everyone else was like, oh, she must, like, you were hidden from, that sigil hides you from other witches. So, like, someone's trying to keep you hidden, and then becomes a question of, well, who and why? And Agatha's like, yeah, that'll be something we'll deal with later. But I'm like, no, you're trying to say, like, well, maybe he's something special, maybe he's not. And it's like, maybe he is, because you have an idea, you at least have hopes, and maybe hopes of who he might be. We'll get to that in a second. But it's like, if you look at episode 2, that was like it seemed like the main contributing factor of why she brought him along was that sigil, because it's like, oh, there's something there that it's like, well, if you're being hidden, you must be something special. She's trying to write it off like, oh, he's nothing. But I can't remember if it was either Lilia or Jen that was like, oh, but you want him all to yourself, whatever special case he may be. That's why you're very, like, bringing him along throughout all of this. I think it's so interesting, too, because obviously this episode was also kind of about witches kind of going back to basics, because, and Jen kind of talks about it, where it's like, obviously before now, because she had her magic, she was able to kind of just, wave everything away, but it's like, now you got to go back to some old school classic witchcraft, as Teen puts it, as like the legitimate crafting of stuff, kind of like, doing stuff by hand, rather than just, like, relying purely on magic, so. Mrs. Hart, which her real name was Mrs. Davies, Sharon, has to constantly tell everyone, my name's not Mrs. Hart. She nearly almost gets grabbed into the ground because she's trying to keep her purse. Like, obviously she's going through it. She's like, I want to go home. This is not what I signed up for. And literally everyone's like, yeah, she's not even an actual witch, and you kind of dragged her along. That's messed up. So, but it's like, yeah, just stay on the road. You won't get killed. They end up going to this house, which I love that it kind of, I don't know what you'd call that vibe that they have, where it's just like their clothes changed, their hair changed, and everything. I don't know what you call that vibe. It's kind of like that posh vibe that they had when they ended up stumbling across that house. And now they're locked in there. They have a riddle to solve, and ultimately it ends up with them, like, popping a bottle of wine and stuff like that. And I love that Sharon is flipping out just about how gorgeous the house is and stuff like that. And we have this moment where Jen ends up talking to Teen about Agatha, and it's like, right, her son, it's like she gave up her son for the Book of the Damned. It's like, that's kind of the murmurings about Agatha, about who she is. Because Teen's like, right, I've heard all they've said about her. It's like, did you know that she potentially killed her child? Like, no one knows what happens. It's like some saying she gave him up for the Book of the Damned. Others are saying he's an agent of Mephisto, which I'm like, hey, this is our first time actually in universe getting the name Mephisto, which obviously, once again, it was like during WandaVision, the whole thing was like Mephisto, 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 and it ended up not being Mephisto. So I feel like Jack Schaefer and the writer is like, well, I mean, because, there's talks about, especially with the Ironheart of it all, because of the Hood having his apparent connections to Mephisto. Once again, I'm not a comic book person. I've listened to enough comic book savvy people talk about stuff like that. So it's like we are really leaning into the Mephisto stuff. Maybe this will be where it kind of starts popping off, maybe. So I don't know if, like, since we're name dropping him here, he will pop up in this series or not. Who knows? But, maybe that's adding validity to, like, part of Agatha's story ultimately does connect to Mephisto. But part of me wonders, like, was that always sort of the plan, or did Jack Schaefer doing that because she's like, no, I was around when everyone was in the Mephisto fever, which everyone could look back on and laugh at, like, man, we were just all on the Mephisto train. So I'm curious if that's kind of a little bit of like now we're on the Mephisto train. I think that'd be interesting. And then especially Jen adding that line of, well, no one knows what ever happened to him. Like, she's like, her child, like, it's the thing of Agatha probably wouldn't even recognize her child, which are like, okay, so they're throwing out their, once again, the running theory before the show even started airing was a lot of people think Joe Locke, who plays Teen, is actually Wicked. It's one of Wanda's children older, but it's like, now they're kind of throwing in the wrench of, well, maybe it's Agatha's son, and the reason why he has the seal on him is that he's being hidden from her specifically, which I think Agatha does have some semblance of thinking that to some degree. Like, that might, because I think it's interesting. Well, because it's like, why do you, like, bring Teen along and you are teaching him, even though you are a selfish person? I mean, granted, she could just be waiting for an opportunity to just, like, take his powers, like she was waiting for the opportunity. Well, desperation at the end of episode 2, where she was just like, go ahead and blast me. I'm talking all kinds of shit, so you'll blast me and I can take your power. So maybe she's just waiting for her moment. But I think it's interesting that when the time came and they found out that the wine was poison, that she was very, like, at first she was just kind of like, nah, like, when everyone's drinking the wine and he wanted some, she's like, oh, go ahead. Because I thought it was interesting. I was like, oh, he's the only one that with that. I was like, well, he is, a teenager, so he is underage. It's like, I mean, it's like, yeah, we might be witches, but we're not assholes. They're, you don't need to be drinking. You're underage. But then, Agatha was almost like, yeah, go ahead, fine. She was the only one that was all about it until they found out it was poison. He's like, fine, I'll take it. She's like, no. And you're like, interesting. Why would you get Agatha, who's selfish, would normally be like, oh, go ahead. Kid wants to take my spot. Let him take my spot. That is totally Agatha. But in this case, it's like, oh, now you're being protective of him. So it's either like, you're on some level, you're thinking he might be your son, which I don't think he will be. But there'll be a point in time when you start thinking, I mean, maybe everyone's wrong in assuming that he's Wiccan. In actuality, we find out he is Agatha's son. We'll see. But maybe that's why she was very protective in that moment. But like I said, it could also just be like no, I don't want to take the chance you'll die. You're very important to all this. But obviously, if it's speaking of Agatha's selfishness, I mean, she's literally the only one that didn't drink the wine because she was like, yeah, there might be something to this. So she waited till everyone's back was turned, poured it like it was nothing. So she knew, because she's like, all right, there's got to be more to this. Like, the wine is something that's kind of presented to us, and it's part of the riddle. There's a timer that suddenly popped up. I misread that because I thought that was like 30 seconds. It's like, no, it's 30 minutes, the timer. But either way, it wasn't until like we got down to like 28 and I was like, oh, right, I see the M for minutes. But either way, everyone sitting around, and there was this interesting moment between Teen and Alice where she has like a tattoo and she's like, I got it when I was 13. It's meant to keep away curses because she was told by her mom that their family is cursed. And then I guess like maybe just like death has it out for them type of situation, or we don't know the specifics of that curse, but I guess like maybe at a certain age or point, like their family's meant to die in maybe brutal ways or something like that. We don't know the extent of it, but I think it's interesting because Alice is like, did I say Jen earlier? I might have said Jen earlier, but meant to say Alice. I don't remember if I said Alice earlier, so I'm retroactively correcting myself if I'm wrong. But Alice talked about her mom being not well, and and I thought it was interesting with this line from Teen being like, yeah, things were kind of rough for me at 13 as well, and I'm like, I wonder if they'll deep dive into that, because I'm wondering, like, maybe that's when Teen found out they were gay, and that's when they kind of went through some rough stuff, or what that is. There's layers to that they could peel back if they want to. We'll see how they handle that. Whether that ends up being kind of a more, hey, like, people go through that type of situation of like being ostracized, or maybe feeling left out, or feeling like othered because of their sexual orientation. Maybe that's, or maybe there's going to be more to it, or maybe it's going to layer thing of it's that plus other factors made. We'll see. I mean, he is someone that's so desperate for a coven and wanting magic, because everyone's trying to feel something inside of themselves. Whether it's Jen wanting powers back because she's been bound for so long, whether it's Lilia trying to, like, as Agatha put it, change her fortune, whether it's Alice wanting to find out what happened to her mom, and it seems like that relationship was complicated, but it's like, I got to find out what happened to my mom and understand everything that's probably connected to her family. But yeah, like, Teen wants a coven. It feels like he desires a family, even though he talks about, like, oh, his mom and his dad, but that could all be BS. Either way, getting to it, it is a whole situation of, hey, we find out that the wine is poisoned, and everyone starts going through the phases of it. Like, first, like, everyone's faces get swollen, which I find the irony behind that, when Sharon was kind of like, oh my god, if I had, like, witch powers and stuff like that, I'd kind of make these wrinkles go away. And then immediately that happens, and everyone's going through it. Except for Agatha, which I love her, like, covering half her face, trying to pretend like she's going through it. And then when everyone's recovered, she's like, oh my god, yeah, that was so terrible what we went through. But now it's like, no, you didn't actually drink the wine. She's trying to bust out of there, which leads to problems later on. So now it's up to Jen to concoct a potion to counteract the poison, because this will ultimately lead to their deaths. And then as they're all scattered around looking for the ingredients, they all kind of go through some past stuff, which obviously it fits very befittingly that, oh, Teen, who is the one that's got the sigil on him, who we don't know anything about, just happens to be the one who we don't get to see anything about his past. But we see with, like, Alice, for example, she sees her mom, and her mom's kind of, like, a little out, and she's just like, your grandmother died, and I could feel it, and she's like, I know it's coming for me, too. Like, once again, I don't know if it's someone specifically, like, is it, like, what the nature of this curse is, and is Alice actually protected from it, like, or is it something else entirely? Like, could it be something specifically hunting that curse in their family, hunts them down and kills them, or what? That's what I'm so curious about in that capacity. But there's more obviously to explore there, because we don't know when her mom disappeared or potentially died on a witch's road. We don't know how old Alice was. We know, like, the tattoo situation, yes, she was 13, but beyond that, we don't know. So there's going to be more to dive into that. There's a whole situation with Lilia. There was, like, a girl being like, oh, do you want to see? And then we saw someone older, which I'm like, I wonder if that's going to be a situation of kind of like, it's going to be a weird pull. If you're familiar with Preacher, I'm specifically referencing the TV show because I don't know if this is a storyline in the graphic novel or not. But there's the whole situation with Cassidy and his son. How his son is older, but then, like, spoilers, Cassidy eventually made him a vampire, like, in the confines of the show. So I'm wondering if that's a situation of that was someone, like, was that a daughter of Lilia's that just aged and never, like either, like, never got the witch stuff and never became a witch or whatever, so she had to watch this person she loved get older and die in front of her. Like, I don't know if that's what that is, or maybe a sister, or, like, I don't know. Then we saw some dark figure pop up behind this girl. And then she told Agatha, like, oh, she's dead. They're all dead. So it might have been family. I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. And then we had Jen's situation where, like, it seemed like there was, like, a doctor being like, you're an inconvenient woman, which I'm like, I'm wondering, is that, I don't know how to interpret that. Like, either that's a very, like, I don't know how to interpret that, because I'm like, I don't know how much it's just me reading way too much into it, and I don't know if the show even wants to cover such a conversation, because I was like, not unless it's a situation of like, that was like her husband, and maybe he was abusive, and being like, oh, you're an inconvenience to me. Like, I don't know if that a race situation played into that or not, or whether or not he's related to her being bound. We talked about witches, but we haven't really covered too much on the warlock front. Are they even going to bother going down that route? Because I don't even remember if Teen even references like warlocks in that capacity or not. So, but like, yeah, everyone went through it. Even Agatha, which we see in her regard, it's like, so it adds validity to what Jen said, where she's hearing her child crying, and removes the blanket from the cradle, and it ends up being the book. I thought it was interesting too when in her own way, Agatha giving the pep talk, being like, Jen, I've always hated you. And she's like, is this supposed to be a pep talk? It's like, yes, in a sense. I've always hated you, but I left you alone and let you do your thing because the work was too important. Not this like crap you're selling to people, which I love the whole thing of like, right, her products are supposed to be organic, there's not supposed to be like petroleum in it, but she's like, no, let's call her bluff. And then it's like, okay, Jen, so which is it? Is it really all that? And it's like, all right, toss them in. It's like, I knew it. I'm wondering what Agatha necessarily meant. I guess it's like, because of like maybe your potions and your potion work has always helped witches. So it's like, I might not like you, but your work has always been good for the witch community. So that's why I've always left you alone and never like bothered just like trying to kill you. Maybe that's what she's implying. And, maybe this has to deal with like Jen's role. I mean, maybe some of this has to deal with why she was bound in the first place. Who knows? There's so many. This kind of gave us a peek into every character, but obviously we still don't know enough about everyone. So, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Jen was able to make the potion, and everyone got cured, and everyone's like, oh my God, thank goodness we have such little time left on. I'm like, are we forgetting about Sharon on the table? Which her line was actually super sad, where she was like, oh my God, she was like, Wanda, please let him breathe. You're like, oh, that's horrible. That, like, obviously it's like, I mean, because it was like back in episode 1 of WandaVision, and you're just like, oh, that's, I mean, it was dark at the time, and now it's just out of context. Her like quivering, just like, please Wanda, let him breathe, is actually extra sad in that regard. Especially when you think about that being technically Sharon's final line in the episode, because they remember at the last second, like, oh my God, the spell isn't broken, we got to get to Sharon, and then they like put the cure in her mouth, but it's like, did they get to it in time? Did we pass? And it seems like we did. And then, because once again, I love this. I love the twist on the whole element of like, right, it's like, if you don't get out of this room in time, it's kind of an escape room situation. If you don't get out of here in time, basically something's going to happen to fill up the room and kill everybody. So I feel like more often than not, it will be a fire situation. I think the thing that makes me immediately think that is spoilers. I mean, it's not even a spoiler. The first episode of Alice in Borderland, like how that fire room situation played out the way it did. Like, I kind of got that same vibe, but it's like, yeah, the crack in the window, it's water, and they're going to drown, which, hey, they're witches, so that's probably why it's specifically water and why you're potentially drowned. But the only exit is through an oven, which I love Lilia being like, no, I had a friend who got put in an oven, that whole thing, I was like, are you implying that Hansel and Gretel kind of happened in this universe, which is kind of interesting, which is an interesting implication. Maybe it's kind of like that thing of like, well, there's the movie version of it, but there was the real life version of like, maybe it's like, they hunted her down and they stuffed her in the oven. Like, that's the darker version of that story type of situation. I mean, the story's pretty dark, where it's like a witch trying to eat people, but it's like, yeah, it's like, that could be like anti-witch propaganda type of situation. As she was saying, or Sharon earlier, it's like, do you see us like on brooms, green skin and all that? It's like, no, that's like hate mongering people have kind of come up with for witches. But also I wonder, is that almost like this self-fulfilling prophecy, kind of like the Icarus situation from Eternals, where it's like, oh, Icarus, wax wings, melted, flying too close to the sun, where Icarus, the Eternal, flew into the sun to kill himself. So it's like, I don't know if that's supposed to be like almost a self-fulfilling prophecy of like the Hansel and Gretel story existed and then it happened to a witch, or it happened to a witch and she was the basis for the Hansel and Gretel story, which probably more likely. So I think that's interesting. Like I said, Icarus' situation is more self-fulfilling prophecy, but either way, I just thought that was interesting. It's like, all right, get in there. All right, grab Sharon. And it's like, Agatha wanted to leave her behind. It's like, all right, fine, we'll just chug her in. And then everyone gets in. And it's like, okay, cool, we passed the first trial. It's all good. It's all kosher. We're all alive. Oh, no, Sharon's dead. I'm like, oh, I wasn't. Oh, that's sad, because I was like, please tell me she's going to wake up and she's actually going to be fine. And I mean, to be fair, she had the poison in her the longest because she was the first one to start drinking the wine, and she drank probably the most of anybody. But also, like, they got to her so late. I mean, they only put it in her system like almost like a second left on the clock, so maybe she probably did die from it, sadly. She is a normal human versus the rest of them being witches, so her constitution might be different from there, so that might be a contributing factor. We'll see. Maybe they'll stick to it and be like, no, she's dead, which might be why they, once again, she was supposed to fill the role of the Earth Witch, even though she's not a witch, and it's probably going to be even more reason why Aubrey Plaza's character will probably be more relevant and important going forward. We'll see. But I love the final line of the episode. Oh my god, Sharon's dead. Who's Sharon? And everyone looks at her, even though I'm like, oh, Agatha, you asshole. Because she was always Mrs. Hart to you. It's just like, oh, you don't care about anybody. You don't care about any of us. We're all a means to an end. If some of us die along the road, who cares as long as you make it to the end? But it's like, you probably want as many, but it's probably in her mind, it's like, well, I want as many of you to survive by the end because I might have to sacrifice you all at the end because maybe that's what she's had to do previously on her previous stint on the road. Not less Agatha create this legend about herself and she never actually completed the road or whatever. Like maybe she gave up part way before completing. Maybe we'll find out some revelation like that. Either way, really quickly, the Sharon bit of her not knowing Sharon's name, kind of, it's not the same, but it kind of reminds me of the Suicide Squad bit with Milton. It's not the same, but it kind of gives me that same energy of, wait, Milton was with us the entire time? It's like, well, at least she acknowledged Miss Hart was there, but just never acknowledged her name being Sharon. But it's like, but it kind of, it's specifically the Harley bit where Harley's like, wait, there was a Milton with us? And she goes like, wait, Milton, like when she looks at his dead body. And like, it kind of plays into it too, where like, it's kind of an inverse where like everyone else cared about Milton, but the only person who did was Polka Dot Man. And inverse of that is like on this where everyone else is like, oh my god, Sharon. And then Agatha's like, who? Oh, who cares? You know, so I'm very excited to see where the next episode takes us, to learn more about our respective witches and their circumstances. Like I said, we got a little peek into some of their circumstances, but not enough to get a full scope of like what everyone's kind of dealt with and, you know, who they are at the heart of their characters. That's the whole point of unraveling stuff. And plus the mystery of who Teen actually is, who put the sigil on him and stuff like that, where that story is going to go. Agatha's backstory as well. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see where all this takes us going forward. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.